Hello, folks. Today we want to talk about influence and tactics that leaders can use to help get the job done. And how do we persuade others? First of all, let's take a look at the learning objectives for our chapter here. We want to describe the relationship between power and influence, to identify a set of honest and ethical influence tactics, identify a set of less honest and less ethical tactics, and to summarize some empirical research about the effectiveness and sequencing of various tactics, and describe how implicit leadership theories are related to a leader's ability to influence group members. Well, first of all, let's talk about power and influence. And influence is, of course, the ability to affect the behavior of others in a particular direction. Power is the potential capacity to make that influence work. And a leader must acquire power to influence others. As I said earlier, one of my management heroes is Rosabeth Moss Kanter from Harvard, who often talks about power, has written a lot about power, and says that power she associates with a very positive function of management, and it really is related with accomplishment. And you're not going to get the job done. You're not going to be able to become productive in the workplace without having power. So power is very important for us to help accomplish our goals. And here in this picture you can see a leader standing up before others, and it appears to me as if she has a lot of power and a lot of influence over others. Look at how they're paying attention to what she is speaking about. Now, here's a model of influence and power. You can see the various sources that make up the influence tactics, the situation, the leader's behaviors, the traits of the leader, and how all this hopefully leads to a very positive outcome that will give us a high level of commitment, we hope, to the organization. Now, some ethical and honest tactics that a leader can use are listed here. I think these are all, excellent examples of what things you need to practice to make sure that you lead by example. Do as I do, follow me in that sense, and you not only talk the talk, but you walk the walk. And you become a team player. You form coalitions. You build support networks. You ask people. You consult. You make an inspirational appeal. These are all tactics that you can use. On the other hand, there can be some dishonest and perhaps some unethical tactics, beginning at the top there, where you actually try to manipulate others and practice deception and other manipulative tactics, down to the bottom where perhaps you can joke and kid around. And these, again, are things that you want to try to avoid in trying to influence others. Again, we see this term of Machiavellians, of people in the workplace who ruthlessly manipulate others. They tend to initiate actions with others and control their interactions. They regularly practice deception, bluffing, and other manipulative tactics. And these are things, of course, you want to avoid. Who wants to work with someone like this? Who wants to be around people like this? Who wants to be part of an organization that supports this and allows this to happen? So this is definitely something that you want to avoid, and something we want to avoid in our contacts with other people. Now, how can we take a look at some effective tactics and some least effective tactics? First of all, the most effective tactics we have would be the rational persuasion, using logic and rationality to help influence people, becoming that inspirational, charismatic leader, asking people for their help on the project. Some of the least effective tactics of trying to influence others is where you pressure people, where you try to build up a certain, a support network, and where you try to say, I'm the boss, so you have to follow me, regardless of what's going on. Now, effective tactics in downward direction. When you're looking down, you can see some of these techniques can work by being that charismatic, having that magic personality, of trying to inspire people, by trying to bring people into your own realm. Also, you can at times, use pressure tactics in a lateral direction. We see this happening so often in organizations today, where you don't have formal authority over someone, and it's working, in a lateral direction in cross departmental lines and so forth like that, where you use the exchange theory that we talked about. You do a favor for me, I'll do a favor for you, where you use personal appeal, and where you say that this is best for the organization, this is what the organization requires us to do. And many times in organizations, when you bring people around to the table, you'll bring them around from various departments where you don't have formal authority or control over them, and you still have to influence them. You still have to use your power, use your tactical persuasion techniques, whatever you have to hopefully bring people together to work together on the project, and to make sure that we're all working together to help accomplish the goals of the organization. Now, one of the things you want to keep in mind is you can use tactics that can be effective, and you may want to think about sequencing them in the sense that begin with the most positive or the least abrasive tactic, and hopefully that will work in trying to get people to do what you want them to do. If necessary, proceed to a stronger tactic, and use a more abrasive tactic such as upward appeal only as a last resort. Begin with the low-cost, low-risk tactics. If necessary, proceed to higher-cost, high-risk tactics. The influence agent must also consider the direction of the influence attempt as a contingency factor. The more position power a person has over another, the less the need for caution for the use of influence tactics, particularly when you find yourself in a mechanistic type organization that's very hierarchical, say the U.S. Army, where you can just see on people's shoulders how many stripes they have, so you know how much power you have. If you have more stripes on your shoulder, then of course you know you have more power over them. So you can influence them. Now, the implicit leadership theories are personal assumptions about the traits and abilities that characterize an ideal organizational leader. These assumptions, both stated and unstated, develop through socialization and past experience with leaders. The assumptions are stored in memory and are activated when group members interact with a person in leadership positions. What this really says is that we have been conditioned over the years to accept leaders and to follow them, and we have to make sure that we follow the right person, that we're doing the right kind of things that will allow others to want to work with us. Now, there are various types of implicit leadership theories. The prototypes are positive characteristics of the leaders. The anti are traits and behaviors that people do not want to see in leaders. Now, we have in the back of our mind certain images of what we want in a leader and some certain images that we don't want in a leader. And if we're going to follow someone, we want to make sure that we have these very positive characterizations of a leader. And you want to make sure that if you're practicing influential tactics, that you have these positive characteristics, such as what we've talked about earlier today. And here are some examples of what we're talking about. Sensitivity, charisma, strength, being well-dressed, being dedicated to the organization. Some of the things that people don't want to see in a leader are the characteristics of where you're manipulative, you're selfish, where you're very dominant, and things like that. These are things that turn people off from wanting to follow you. So in summary, what can we say here? We can say that influence is the ability to affect the behaviors of others in a particular direction. Power is the potential or capacity to influence, and you're not going to be able to influence people without having power. So it's very important that you acquire power and use it in a positive nature. A leader's influence outcomes, commitment, compliance, or resistance are a function of the influence tactics that you pick. Some tactics are either ethical or unethical, and of course you want to be very much aware that what you are doing, it does fall into the ethical realm. The last thing you want to do is to try to influence people through unethical behavior. The most effective influence tactics are rational persuasion, inspirational appeal, and consultation. And the least effective tactics are pressure, coalition and appealing to the legitimate authority. I use this exercise in class quite often with my management students where they have to play a role-playing exercise where they're boss and they're trying to get their subordinate to do something the subordinate doesn't want to do. And too often in trying to influence a situation, they'll pull out what I say the big guns and they'll say, I'm in charge, you do it or you're fired. And what usually happens very quickly in the exercise is that the person says, okay, I'm not going to do it, fire me. And the leader ends up in what we call a lose-lose situation. They've lost an employee and they didn't get the job done, only because they moved to the least effective influence tactic as their first resort, when in fact it should be the last resort. And so what you need to do, you need to be aware of what are the various tactics that I can use, what works well with my people, and how can I make sure that I get the job done. And so I think this chapter has a lot of good information in here for us to consider and for us to practice and hopefully become more effective in getting the job done through others by using power and influence to help us accomplish this. Well, thank you very much. And there's just one other couple things here under the summary here, that in the sequencing direction of influence tactics is important, and the implicit leadership theories are personal assumptions about the traits and abilities that characterize an ideal organizational leader.